Welcome to Click to Learn More, the show that sounds like clickbait.
But it's actually two dorks.
I'm Dorm.
I'm Lidi.
And today, Lidi,
Dorm.
we're revisiting my first revisit topic.
Wrestling.
Yeah, we're doing wrestling.
Boys.
I feel like you've done like 3 murder ones, so I was like, you know what? I have license to do another wrestling episode.
I have done at least 3 murder ones.
Yeah.
I think it's safe to say.
I was trying to limit myself to doing... Because I don't want this just to be like a wrestling fan cast for my episodes. So I was trying to limit myself to using wrestling. But I feel like once every 10 is fine.
Yeah, I've been legitimately concerned that my episodes are all going to be murder-based. So I think it's good that you come in and sprinkle some happiness in occasionally.
Well, happiness is... We'll see.
Okay.
Because today, whenever you're listening to this, we're talking about the Monday Night Wars. Do you have any sort of... predilections about what this is?
Is it anything to do with Monday Night Raw?
It is.
Okay, I do know.
And the inception of that television program.
Inception, good movie.
Good movie.
That's all I know.
Okay. So, the Monday Night Wars
okay.
is the common term describing the period between, these are very specific dates for a reason, we'll get into them. Okay. September 4th, 1995.
Wow.
The year I was born.
Oh, I was going to say.
To March 26th, 2001.
Okay.
So roughly 5.5 years.
Okay.
During this time, the World Wrestling Federation at the time, they're now World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, they were WWF for a while, then the World Wildlife Fund said we were WWF first.
Said you can't make us wrestle pandas anymore.
Yes.
You have to change your name.
They were like, all right, we have to change our name, so they added an E, so now they're WWE.
Okay.
Which is harder to say than WWF.
It is, oddly enough.
So the WWF's Monday Night Raw went head-to-head with World Championship Wrestling, WCW, their program called Monday Nitro.
Okay.
And it was basically a Nielsen ratings battle.
So it was just for the ratings.
Yes.
Okay.
The war was really what we would end up finding out was for like wrestling supremacy, I guess. Like who was going to be the main wrestling company.
Okay.
Before this, there was no real like... Well, you could argue that WWF was still sort of the main dog because they did a WrestleMania pay-per-view, and that was like a huge risk for the company. We might do an episode on that, but this was past like WrestleMania 1. We'll get into it in a minute. In the UK and also in Ireland, it was known as the Friday Night Wars.
Okay.
Because those shows aired on Friday nights
instead of Monday.
Yeah, because they had some weird like TNT and Sky Sports had weird like rights things, so it aired 4 days later.
Oh,
which is weird because this is the time of this is the time of the internet. So on like on forums and stuff, people could know. Interestingly enough, wrestling is way bigger per capita in the UK than it is in the US.
Really?
Yeah, like there are. I would argue that there are more, again, a higher percentage of hardcore wrestling fans in the UK.
Are there many wrestlers that come from the UK?
Yes, right now especially.
Okay, so that would explain.
In this time there wasn't really that many. But there have also always been like independent promotions, and right now we're hitting sort of what people are calling like the British wrestling renaissance.
Okay.
WWE even has now a UK only tournament every year.
Oh, interesting.
So it's only British wrestlers or only wrestlers from the UK, not just British.
Cool.
But
okay.
So it's a really big thing right now. So the ratings war was part of a larger overall struggle between the two companies, which included the use of cutthroat tactics and legitimate defections of several wrestlers and writers between the two companies.
Okay.
This was like super dramatic.
Yeah, it sounded like it.
It was a highly dramatic period. To let you know how ridiculous all of this is, there is I believe, 12-part series on the WWE Network.
12
each an
parts.
hour long.
It's like an episode of DBZ.
Yeah.
12 episodes?
Each an hour long, documenting all of the Monday Night Wars. So we're not going to cover everything. There's no way.
That's ridiculous.
It is like, I would say it's probably one of the most beloved periods in wrestling because, of course, competition brings the best out of everybody.
Okay.
So some of the best moments in wrestling ever happened in this period. Also, some of the worst moments in wrestling ever happened in this period because they were trying new things and some of them were just god awful.
Yeah.
So it's a really interesting historical time in wrestling.
Okay.
The Monday Night Wars largely sprang from a rivalry between two men
Two dudes.
Yes.
Two boys. Two boys fought.
WWF owner Vince McMahon.
Boo.
Vinnie Mac.
Boo.
And WCW owner and media mogul Ted Turner.
Okay, so this is like kind of buck wild to me. You mentioned it once before.
Yes.
And it's just so weird to me to think of Ted Turner just being like, all right, boys, go wrestle.
So one of the things that made, I believe, TBS huge
Okay.
was that they always had, and Ted has said this in an interview, one of the things that made them great was they always had baseball and they always had wrestling. That's how he said wrestling. So they always had wrestling. So he said that like baseball, basketball, and wrestling are what kept him alive in the early days. As far as like the channel goes. So he always believed in it as a money-making thing. Yeah, exactly.
Big mood.
And this dates back to their sort of quarrel. Dates back to an incident in the 80s known as Black Saturday. The wrestling world is littered with overly dramatic terms.
It's so dramatic.
And it's so good. I love it.
It's like a soap opera.
So Black Saturday was when Vince acquired a monopoly on all national televised wrestling broadcasts by purchasing a stake in Georgia Championship Wrestling, whose flagship show aired on WTCG, Turner's own network. Uh-oh. So he bought a stake. He was a competitor, or he was on a competing channel, but then he bought a stake in a company that was on his channel.
Okay.
So Vince's dad, Vince Sr., was another Vince.
Okay, Vince Sr.
He started the Worldwide Wrestling Foundation, which was the Federation, the WWWF.
WWWF? There used to be an extra W?
Yes, worldwide instead of just worldwide. So it's real. I'm not making it up. So they got a lot of flack together, especially when Vince Jr., the Vince we know.
Big shoulder Vince.
Yeah, big awkward walking Vince. When Vince started gathering up regional wrestling companies.
Okay.
So WWF was a regional wrestling company. And then WWF was Vince trying to say, we're going to buy that region and that region and that region, and we're going to make a national network of wrestling federations.
Okay.
So that's why it's a Worldwide Wrestling Federation. That's where the name comes from.
Okay.
So Turner didn't like that. He was used to the territorial days. And he got rather territorial about his wrestling on his TV. Turner, displeased with McMahon's handling of programming on his network, pressured McMahon into selling his time slot to Jim Crockett Promotions, another wrestling promotion.
There was a lot going on during this time.
Yeah, so it was sort of, they call it like the Wild Wild West, where it was just like everybody had, and think of it like almost like a bigger version of like your local town's like fair barn wrestling.
Yeah.
Kind of thing. Like those were the federations that were popping up. Granted, it had more production value than just that, but like that was sort of the essence. It was very like groundswell movements.
Yeah.
So as wrestling began to grow popular in the early 90s, the organizations, and as a result their programming, became a venue through which business feud could continue, with each company working to drive out the other business. So they were trying to like sort of tear at each other's throat. So Turner turns Jim Crockett Promotions into World Championship Wrestling and gives, and I've said this on the podcast before, one of my favorite press conferences ever. And he just says, WCW is the future of professional wrestling. And the way he says that is so good. So
did anybody take Ted Turner seriously with this wrestling stuff?
Yes. So
he was actually like a presence in wrestling at this time. Okay.
Vince was sort of, I'm trying to think of a good comparison. Vince was like sort of the inside guy who, you know, he grew up as like, he was like a ring boy, and then like, you know, kind of came through the system, but his dad owned the company, so it was like that kind of thing.
Nepotism.
Right. Where Ted was more of he's a business mogul who knows how valuable wrestling is.
Oh.
So he garnered a lot of respect for not treating it like some sideshow and giving it the time it deserved, and knew how to make money from it. Right, exactly.
Okay.
He wasn't necessarily a wrestling fan, but he knew how it made money, and so he pursued it.
Okay.
Which I think is really cool. Like it's
he
almost
meant it from a businessman.
Right. He didn't care he didn't really care about the product itself. He just cared if the product was making money.
Okay.
So those are sort of the two minds. Vince has always had a mind, quote unquote, for wrestling, where Ted had a mind, quote unquote, for business.
Yeah.
Okay. And that was sort of the thing.
That's fair.
WCW dominated the ratings for a while.
Okay.
So early on, it was back and forth. So the reason it started September 4th, 1995, and we'll get into it, but is Monday Nitro, sorry.
Okay.
Monday Nitro was WCW's direct competition show to Monday Night Raw. Okay. Before they were doing it like on Tuesdays or whatever. Eric Bischoff, legendary wrestling guy, manager, announcer, general, like he's just
wrestling guy,
wrestling figure, I guess.
Wrestling fella.
He was vice president at the time and was very adamant about, we have to go to Monday nights. We have to take this on head on. And then he basically, well, we'll get into it. Ted Turner's financial resources allowed the company to purchase the services of numerous high-profile WWF performers, including Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage.
Brother.
So this was an era really interesting in wrestling where Vince was getting tired of Hulkamania and Randy Savage's whole shtick, and he realized he could make money off of them, but it wasn't willing to pay top dollar for them because he was like, they're aged goods, right? Like he thought they already hit their prime. Where Turner was like, no, these names are well known. We're going to bring them over. And so they started dominating because they knew how to use those names. We'll get into why that was a bad decision on WCW's part a little bit later. But the company also drew casual fans' attentions by filming events at popular tourist venues such as Disney's Hollywood Studios. What? Yeah, so they filmed, WCW legitimately was filmed at Disney Hollywood Studios for 2 years.
They wrestled?
Yeah, they had a lot in Hollywood Studios. So sometimes if you go back and watch like old WCW tapings, they're like Mickey Mouse shirts and like...
That's goofy.
They also reached out to Mexican and Japanese wrestling fans through their cruiserweight division, which featured wrestlers from a diverse array of ethnic and racial backgrounds, competing in matches featured style of wrestling popular in Latin America and Asia. This was sort of groundbreaking at the time, because WWF was not doing this. Ooh. They had like a couple Japanese wrestlers from Japanese promotions come over during a pay-per-view, but never to the effect that WCW was. Okay. So
WCW was like branching out worldwide.
Yes,
literally,
and they were embracing other styles and embracing other talents that were big.
Because wrestling was huge in Japan, like at this point, and has been for a while.
Yes, Japan is probably the second biggest market for wrestling. Well, I'd say the UK is probably second, so they're probably the third biggest market just from size. Again, wrestling is huge in Japan. Under the control of Bischoff, WCW introduced a new complex meta story involving the defection of multiple wrestlers to a rival organization called the NWO.
The New World Order.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So WWF owner Vince McMahon's controversial treatment of Bret Hart in an incident known as the Montreal Screwjob.
Bret Hart.
Do you know about the Montreal Screwjob?
No, but I know Bret Hart.
Oh, Lidi.
Bret Hart is my son.
Immediately precipitated Hart's departure from the WWF to WCW, enabling a large segment of WWF's fan base. At the same time, WCW came to employ virtually all of the established wrestling stars that in competition. So it was basically like a switch.
Okay.
The Montreal Screwjob.
Okay.
The most infamous thing to ever happen in wrestling.
Okay.
Bret Hart is
the Hitman Hart.
Yes. Canadian.
Uh-huh.
Hates Shawn Michaels.
Yes.
Absolutely hates them.
Yes.
They hated each other.
I liked both of them.
They hated each other for years. Legitimately. This is not like, story rivalry. They legitimately did not like each other. Yeah, hated each other.
I didn't know that. I thought it was story based.
Brett thought Shawn was a punk and he was high all the time, and he was. And Shawn thought Brett was like entitled and
goody two shoes.
Yeah, they legitimately hated each other. I didn't
know this.
Yes. And so
my
Brett,
two sons hated each other.
Vince wanted Brett to drop the belt, to lose, and drop the championship to Shawn at a pay-per-view that was in Montreal. And Brett said, I'll drop the... This is Brett's story. Brett said, this is all very controversial. Brett said, I'll drop the belt, just not in Canada.
Well, that's his home.
Right, he loves Canada.
That's his home.
And so...
Don't make him drop the belt in his
Vince
home.
was so worried about either Brett running with the title because his contract was up, but they were renegotiating, but Vince was worried he'd go to WCW anyway with the belt.
Oh.
And so...
Can you take a belt?
Yeah, you can, and we'll get into when that happens.
Oh, shoot.
So Brett and Shawn are wrestling.
Okay.
Vince tells Earl Hebner, veteran official referee Earl Hebner, whenever Shawn puts Brett in the sharpshooter, Shawn puts Brett in the sharpshooter.
Okay.
Not the other way around.
Okay.
Because Shawn was like reversing his finisher or whatever.
Okay.
Ring the bell. He's like, I don't care if Brett doesn't tap. Ring the bell.
End of match. Over.
Yeah. And so Earl had to do what he had to do. And rings the bell.
Oh, no.
So, Shawn wins the title. Brett never taps. Vince comes out to try to alleviate the situation. Brett, like, gets in his face, spits in his face. Oh, and this was the dawn of the evil character of Vince McMahon. Mr. McMahon started accidentally from this moment. So that's why Brett defected. He was so pissed that this happened. And Brett went to WCW. He would then get kicked in the head by Goldberg and have to retire early because of head injuries. But that is sort of the story of the Montreal Screwjob.
Casually.
Well, that's what happened.
Okay. So casual.
All right. Throughout the late 1990s, so we're going to do just kind of like a head-over summary, and then we're going to get into details.
Okay.
The WWF began to rise in popularity after it rebranded itself as more adult-themed, sexualized, and violent.
Okay.
So, in order to give you a little bit of time frame, this was in the era of Howard Stern, the era of South Park, shock comedy, like Girls Gone Wild.
Yeah.
It was not a great time to look at historically, but that was what was dominating media at the time. Jerry Springer, like these were the things that were sort of running pop culture. So instead of being and eat your vitamins and say your prayers, which is what Hulk used to say.
Yeah.
Instead of that sort of product that was totally abandoning the adults who watched that as a kid were grown-ups now. And so...
And wanted to see some...
They wanted to see something edgy.
Yeah.
And WCW was doing that for a while with NWO. They were like, oh, they're catering to us, the adults, because kids wouldn't know what the NWO is.
Right.
They wouldn't know why these guys are defecting.
Oh,
It was
sad.
So that's what WWF took on.
No.
It now referred to itself as the Attitude Era, which is the best era in wrestling.
Okay.
Despite all of the shenanigans and all the crap that was on TV at times, it had probably the best... It was probably the best time for wrestling
And this
ever.
is the late 90s still?
Yes.
Early 2000s,
yes.
late 90s? Okay.
Yes. During this period, The Rock would become very popular and then would embark on a successful acting career.
Yes.
While Mick Foley... Stone Cold Steve Austin, The Undertaker, Kane, all of these people sort of rose to prominence in the Attitude Era. Triple H.
That totally makes sense. Okay.
There was sort of a wrestling renaissance that happened. I've used that term twice. But in the late 90s, WCW's ratings began to suffer as fans grew tired of the NWO storyline, which many viewers perceived as having been allowed to go on for too long.
Okay.
So the NWO was like fire to the wrestling world.
Okay.
Like, people didn't know what was going on. They loved it. It was probably the most popular angle ever in wrestling. It brought people to WCW like nobody's business. You could argue that, like, the Bullet Club now are doing that, but that was just, like, huge. Yeah. So, it's funny because the NWO actually started that.
They started the Too Sweet?
Mm-hmm. So...
I didn't know that.
The thing WCW did, which it befalls a lot of wrestling and pop culture in general, they had something great, and they thought, this is never going to end.
Right.
So we're just going to add...
Let's write it out.
The NWO is going to grow to 20 members, and it's going to get ridiculous. It almost, like, just became too many characters, and the NWO at one point split into two different NWOs. There was, like, NWO Black and White and NWO Wolfpack is a real thing. And then they, like...
Wait, I kind of recognize the Wolfpack.
Yeah, your boy Sting was in it.
That's why.
They were black and red instead of black and white.
Oh,
and then those went away, and then NWO 2000 was formed because everybody was doing 2000 at the time. It was bad. Like, they just went too wild with it.
That's fair.
Fans also responded negatively to several gimmicks intended to reinvigorate interest in WCW, including the introduction of an actor as the company's new champion, Mr. David Arquette.
I remember when this
David
happened.
Arquette was WCW World Champion for a couple of months.
That's weird.
Yep.
That's okay. But as a wrestling fan, do not feel cheated, though.
Oh, yeah. People hated it. Fans hated it.
When David Arquette, or when any actor
any
shows
non-wrestler.
up. Yeah. Any non-wrestler. Okay, because he was kind of like weaselly and small.
Yes.
Shows up.
So what they wanted to do
cheating.
Was build hype for Ready to Rumble, the film he was in.
Okay.
What it did was make the entire roster of WCW look weak. Because your world champion, your biggest title in your company, is held by some outsider who looks like he weighs 100 pounds soaking wet.
Yeah, he was there trying to promote Eight-Legged Freaks, so it was really weird when
he
all
came
of a
out
sudden
and
he
had
sprouted
8
eight
legs.
legs and started attacking people. It was like really weird. It's a really weird moment for the wrestling world.
That was strange. The company was able to briefly reinvigorate itself after the introduction of Bill Goldberg, who was presented as an unbeatable force who won matches within a matter of minutes or even seconds. Goldberg quickly rose to stardom within the within the organization and became a crossover star similar to WWF's performers with appearances in commercials and music videos. However, controversial backstage decision to end Goldberg's winning streak followed quickly by an anticlimactic match involving Kevin Nash and Hollywood Hogan.
Okay.
And Scott Hall came out with a cattle prod.
I'm sorry, what?
You know what a cattle prod is?
Yeah.
That's how Goldberg lost his streak.
No.
Yeah.
I didn't like Goldberg.
He got shocked with a cattle prod, and that's how he lost.
And then he lost.
Yeah.
The game? He lost the match?
He lost his streak, yeah.
Because he got zapped?
Mm-hmm.
It
was dumb. People hated it.
Well, yeah.
Simultaneously, the company experienced financial woes due to the amount of money it had promised wrestlers in their contracts during a hiring bid in the early 90s. So remember when I was telling you about them getting everybody to defect?
Yep.
Well, they had to put up or shut up.
Yeah.
And were owing these wrestlers ridiculous figures when they weren't pulling it.
Yeah.
Now, that would be fine had they not allowed the wrestlers what was called creative control. So one of the ways they coaxed people over was to say, you are this character, right? You have control over what this character does.
I mean, you would want that.
Right. That would be really appealing as a wrestler.
Yeah.
What happened is that some of the bigger stars were like, I have creative control. I'm not on TV this week. You're still paying me. No, I'm still not on TV.
So what, they just decided,
you know what? Sorry,
I'm take some paid vacation for 3 weeks?
Sorry, I'm hurt. I'm so hurt. My character's hurt. I can't be on TV. And
well,
so they
that's
literally
not fair.
sat at home and collected checks. Hogan did it.
That's not cool.
Savage,
I
think,
fans?
did
you
it.
Don't care about your fans? Your fans want to see you.
But you collected money.
But your fans.
I'm with you.
Your fans, you get money and you.
But it was
please your
WCW's
fans.
flub up to allow this to happen.
Yeah, that's fair. But that's also kind of crappy to know that you have a bunch of fans and to be like, whoops, can't fight.
Yeah.
Give me money.
So some of those are the things that ailed WCW.
Yeah. Ted Turner.
Yes.
Personally.
So we're going to go back to the beginning.
Okay.
In 1993, Primetime Wrestling, which was what WWF's main product was struggling and was canceled by USA. Which is funny because USA now holds Raw. The show that succeeded it, Monday Night Raw, changed how wrestling on cable TV would be presented. WWF decided that it should use its cable time as a showcase for original matches and storylines that would serve as the major build-up to the quarterly pay-per-view broadcasts.
Okay.
So before, it was almost like they would protect matches for pay-per-views.
Okay.
So like, let's say Hulk Hogan versus Coco Beware, right? They wouldn't have anything about that on any of the shows leading up to it.
Okay.
They might have some interviews with Mean Gene Okerlund talking about, this Sunday, or it might not even be Sunday at the time. It's probably Thursday. So like, come this Thursday, Coco Beware is going to have, a reckoning for him or whatever, because he wouldn't have said ass. Right. At the time.
Right.
So then they decided, no, instead of protecting things, we're going to actually build up to them.
Okay.
So it's almost like pay-per-views became, I guess a good analogy for non-wrestling fans would be like mini season finales. So like, you have these two guys feuding on TV. What we call TV is like free television.
Okay.
So Monday Night Raw would be TV. Feuding on TV, and then the payoff would be this big match they're having in a pay-per-view. Now, sometimes they'll feud for 2 or 3 pay-per-views, but this was not how they used to approach it. It used to just be, they're going to wrestle some nobodies, what's called jobbers in wrestling, for a little while, and then at the pay-per-view, that's when the big match happens.
Okay.
But then it was more like these guys are going to be involved in storylines together, and then the payoff is going to be at a pay-per-view, which was way more successful because you're more interested in the overall product.
Right.
You're more invested in the match. As Roddy Piper's really been just being an asshole the whole time. I really want to see him get his ass kicked.
And you're more likely to pay the money to watch the pay-per-view.
Right. And this was before the time, and this might seem weird to some younger people, but you actually had to pay for the pay-per-view.
Yeah.
And it was like $40.
Pay-per-view was actually pay-per-view.
Right. It was before streaming. It was before like WWE Network or anything like that. You had to pay for the pay-per-view. So, $40 is a lot of money to invest in one night of programming.
Yeah.
So they had to start building it up and get people to be invested in the overall product.
Yeah. That makes sense.
So the Raw formula is very different than Primetime Wrestling. Instead of tape matches, oh, by the way, Primetime Wrestling was pre-taped. Was not live. Yeah.
Oh.
Instead of tape matches...
Was it presented as if it were live?
Not really.
Okay.
It'd be like...
So you knew tuning in, this was pre-taped.
And see what happened between...
Okay.
That's a pretty good early Vince impersonation I just did. Vince McMahon used to do all the commentary, and he sounded way different than the Vince McMahon you know now. Because he put on this voice that was very big and very big-chested, and I'm Vince McMahon, and it was really
I
good.
sling my arms when I walk.
He does.
So you knew going into it, though, that it was...
Yeah, I think probably your smarter fans knew. Maybe other people might have...
Smarter fans?
Sorry, not like... Not smart as in intelligence-wise, smarter to the business.
Okay.
Like smarkier fans.
Okay, that's fair.
Instead of tape matches with studio voiceovers and tape chat, Raw was a show shot to a live audience with storylines unfolding as they happened. The first episode featured Sean Mooney reporting from the streets of New York City in interviews with Bobby Heenan, Yokozuna defeating Koko Beware, the Steiner brothers defeating the Executioners, WWF Intercontinental Champion Shawn Michaels, the Heartbreak Kid, defeating Max Moon, who looked like Mega Man. This is not a lie. He looked like Mega Man.
As long as Shawn Michaels beat somebody, I didn't care.
And The Undertaker defeating Damien Demento. The show also featured
Undertaker.
The show also featured an interview with Razor Ramon, who would be Scott Hall and be one of the first members of the NWO.
Yeah. Okay.
Raw originated from the Grand Ballroom at the Manhattan Center, a New York City theater, and aired live each week. Combination of an intimate venue and live action proved highly successful. However, the weekly live schedule became a financial drain on WWF, and the company began taping shows. Sometimes up to a month's worth of shows were taped at a time.
Wow.
So they were still doing it in front of a live audience, but weren't airing it live because it was so expensive.
Okay.
In the same year as the premiere of Monday Night Raw, WCW promoted former commentator and American Wrestling Association announcer Eric Bischoff to the position of Executive Vice President. This would be huge. During Bischoff's first year at the top of WCW, bookers Ole Anderson and Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream, concocted cartoonish, unbelievable, and poorly built-up storylines that were poorly received by fans, such as Lost in Cleveland, a storyline where Cactus Jack, Mick Foley,
what?
He was in WCW before he was in WWE. Okay. Developed amnesia and disappeared in Cleveland. Another one was the White Castle of Fear, a match between Sting and Vader themed around B-movies meant to promote Super Bowl III, and tongue-in-cheek short beach party movies used as promotional video for Beach Blast. Anderson and Rhodes' booking style was generally in line with this lighthearted, morally uncomplicated narrative that had been popular in 80s wrestling, but which was generally looked upon with growing disdain by younger wrestling fans.
Oh, man.
In February 1993, longtime NWA stalwart Ric Flair returned to WCW after an 18-month WWF tenure. But since Flair was constrained by a no-compete clause from his WWF contract, WCW gave him a talk show segment on its television shows called A Flair for the Gold. What a great name. That name's awesome.
That's so good.
At Slamboree 1993, WCW reunited the Four Horsemen
Yeah.
with Flair, Arn Anderson, my actual dad, and Paul Roma and Ole Anderson. Ole Anderson was part of the group as an advisor, but made only one appearance on Flair for the Gold. A Flair for Gold would eventually play host to one of the most infamous incidents of 1990s wrestling. On a live Clash of the Champions building up to the Fall Brawl pay-per-view, a lot of names here, WCW decided to introduce a mystery partner for its babyfaces. A masked man known as the Shockmaster.
The Shockmaster.
Have you ever seen this?
No.
I have something to show you.
Who's the Shockmaster?
The Shockmaster was supposed to crash through a fake wall and intimidate the heels.
Okay.
However, and please look this up on YouTube if you've not seen it, it is worth the watch even if you don't care about wrestling. He tripped through the wall, fell on live television, and briefly knocked off his star-studded stormtrooper helmet. This is all real. The incident would be talked about for years to come in the burgeoning internet wrestling culture, along with WWF's gobbledygooker. The gobbledygooker was a thing they built up for months about this fucking egg. And it would just sit at the ramp on different wrestling shows.
What?
It was an egg. Like a huge human-sized egg.
What?
Like you could fit a human in it. And I was like, what'll be in this egg? This is true.
Wrestling is insane!
On Survivor Series, whatever year it was, the egg hatched. And people thought like, oh, it might be somebody. Like they thought it was going to be a cool reveal. Or it might be like something important to a storyline.
Or maybe it's a giant chicken.
It was a giant turkey. Played by Eddie Guerrero's dad or uncle, Hector Guerrero. And he was just a giant turkey named the Gobbledygooker. So those two things were some of the worst things that ever happened in wrestling, and they're fantastic.
What? Like, that... Sorry. What? A giant turkey?
During the Disney tapings... Lydia's flabbergasted.
I'm still stuck on this giant turkey thing. Like, who thought that was a good idea?
The Disney tapings would ultimately prove disastrous to WCW's reputation, largely due to the company's underestimation of growing internet culture. Because the events were recorded weeks and sometimes months in advance, fans in attendance had time to disseminate the results not only to wrestling magazines, but also across the internet.
Fair.
Seating at the events was also partially contingent upon wearing merchandise promoting different wrestlers, and audience members began being made to respond on cue to particular in-ring events. So almost like an applause sign.
Yeah, that's fair.
This was regarded as a major breach of kayfabe. You know what kayfabe is?
I remember kayfabe.
Yes. And ultimately led to WCW's departure from the NWA in September 1993. By the end of the year, WCW decided to once again base the promotion around Rick Flair.
Woo!
The decision was largely made out of necessity. The company had intended to place heavy emphasis on Sid Vicious, but he was involved in a legitimate altercation with fellow wrestler and my dad, Arn Anderson, while on tour in England. A heated argument between the men escalated into a physical altercation, which culminated in
This is not while they're wrestling. This is just like...
No, it's legit. Which culminated in Sid stabbing Arn with a pair of scissors. And then Arn, like the badass he is, pulled out the scissors and stabbed Sid back.
With the same pair of scissors that he had been stabbed with. This is real life?
Yes.
This isn't a wrestling
This
thing.
isn't filmed. This just happened. And both the men have like apologized to each other and this whole thing. Because Sid's attack on Anderson was more violent, and because of Arn Anderson's close relationship with Ole Anderson, the booker, the guy in charge, the decision was made to fire Sid. Sid's departure resulted in a further problem for the company, as he had been scheduled to defeat Big Van Vader for the rest in peace, he just died, for the WCW World Heavyweight Championship at Starrcade in 1993. Several weeks' worth of Disney tapings had been filmed with Sid as the champion, with the intention not to air it until the following year.
Oh, dang.
Sid's departure from the company meant that hours' worth of footage had suddenly become worthless.
Wow.
So the way they had to do it was because they pre-taped. Before he walked, they'd already filmed him for months as champion.
Oh, no.
And then he stabbed Arn Anderson, my dad.
He can't be champion anymore. Oh, no.
In 1994, Eric Bischoff took a more aggressive stance in his capacity as vice president. He declared open war on the WWF and aggressively recruited high-profile former wrestlers as Hulk Hogan and Randy Savage using Ted Turner's funds. Because their high profiles, Hogan and Savage were able to demand and get several concessions not usually allowed to wrestlers at the time. Notably, the men negotiated total creative control of their characters, in addition to multi-year, multi-million-dollar contracts at a time where many top wrestlers were only receiving around $1 million a year. Bischoff's concession to Hogan and Savage would set a precedent for WCW's hiring process that would prove problematic in later years. As Bischoff began to aggressively pursue rival talent for jobs with WCW, performers, aware of the deals Hogan and Savage had been given, began to demand similar contracts, ultimately causing wrestling salaries to soar out of control. Concurrent with Hogan's arrival in WCW, he and Bischoff formed a close real-life friendship that would afford Hogan a degree of influence over the day-to-day operations of the company, which is never good.
That's not good. Not a good thing.
Monday Nitro premiered on September 4th, 1995 as an hour-long weekly show, and Bischoff was instrumental in the launching of the show. During the mid-1995 meeting, Turner asked Bischoff how WCW could compete with WWF. Bischoff, not expecting Turner to comply, said the only way to only way would be a primetime slot on a weekday night, possibly up against WWF's flagship show, Monday Night Raw.
Oh, dang.
Surprisingly for Bischoff, Turner granted him one live hour of TNT every Monday night, which specifically overlapped with Raw. The format expanded to 2 live hours in May 1996 and later 3. Bischoff himself was initially the host. He handled the first hour along Bobby Heenan and former NFL football player Steve Mongo McMichael, who was a terrible commentator.
Really?
With Tony Schiavone and Larry Zbyszko hosting the second, who were much better. Other co-hosts included Mike Tenay, usually for matches involving cruiserweights or international stars, Scott Hudson, and Mark Madden, probably the worst wrestling commentator of all time.
Really?
I hate Mark Madden.
Oh.
The initial broadcast of Nitro also featured the return of Lex Luger to WCW.
Okay, it's throwing me because Lex Luger is so close to Lex
Luthor,
which
yeah.
is what I think they're going for.
Yeah.
But it's far enough away that it's just kind of like a little cringy.
So this is cool.
A little bit.
Luger got big. So Hulk went to WCW. Lex Luger, who was doing a great narcissist gimmick, like pulled out a big mirror to look at himself, was like great as a heel in WWF in the early 90s.
That would be me as a babyface.
As a babyface?
Yeah.
Like a good guy just loving yourself.
I'm just, self-love's important.
That's
Self-care's
true.
important.
That's true.
Yeah, that's a babyface thing.
When Hulk
Self-care.
left, they saw Luger's physique and were like, "You're the next Hulk."
They saw them sexy muscles and they were like, "You."
Yes. What? So then he became like an American hero kind of character. And he had, I love wrestling. He had the Lex Express, which was a bus.
Okay, what?
Which was a bus where he went on like a nationwide tour.
A real life tour.
Yes, promoting himself at like malls and
a 3-hour tour.
Yes. That was good. So the Lex Express was a thing. That wasn't very good. But because Raw was being
terrible.
pre-taped
like
at the
what
time.
He called his penis.
I mean, he probably did.
Ew.
You don't think he'd call it like the Luge?
Ew.
The Luge? Oh, that's good.
The luge is good, but also so bad.
Hey, girl, you want to take a ride on the Luge?
Ew. Do you want to take a ride on the Lex Express?
Also very
that's
good.
We just want a quickie. That's just a quickie.
Yeah.
That's an in and out kind of job. Okay, well, just put it in front of my face. That's fine.
For those of you at home, I adjusted the mic. That sounded awful. Just put it in front of my face. That's fine.
That's me.
That's really what you're
What's
going
his
with?
name?
Oh, Lex.
Yeah, to Lex. Luger.
He looks like he's deflated as a man now, and it's very funny.
Ew. How old is he now?
Old. So he was
hashtag old.
He was
Retweet
on
this episode with hashtag old.
He was on Monday Night Raw.
Mm-hmm.
The episode where he defected and went to WCW because they had pre-taped. Remember when I said they switched from live to pre-tape?
Yeah.
So he had pre-taped an episode of Raw.
Yeah.
And was on WCW the same night.
Oh my god.
So it was awesome because everybody was so confused.
That's so dramatic.
They filmed it out in Mall of America of all places, and he was wearing the equivalent of the Seinfeld white puffy shirt.
No.
It was ridiculous.
No.
It's the most 90s thing you've ever seen. It's fantastic.
That's ridiculous. Okay.
Also that night, Luger would be followed by former WWF Women's Champion Alundra Blaze, fantastic name, who appeared with the WWF Women's Championship belt on the December 18th, 1995 edition, so a little bit later, of Nitro, and basically ragged on WWF and because she was still champion, had the belt, took it, and dropped it in a trash can. So badass. Like, one of the most iconic parts of any Monday Night War. Because it was just a middle finger to this former company, right? Like,
okay.
It was so cool.
So that's what everybody wants to do with their, like, previous employer.
Yeah, exactly.
When you start a new job, it's what everybody wants to do. Okay.
Right.
All right. Okay. I get that.
Raw and Nitro traded wins in the Monday Night Wars early on, but WWE has conceded that by December 1995, WCW had the advantage over the WWF in the storied Monday Night War. Nitro began airing a weekly segment entitled Where the Big Boys Play, composed of stock footage of matches featuring current WWF wrestlers, I almost said superstars, because that's what they say to call them now, who had started their careers as jobbers or low-ranking wrestlers in WCW. So they're basically like, hey, you know those guys that are like huge over in WWF now? We had them and they were terrible. Look at this. So that's what they were doing.
Oh, shoot.
It was so petty. It was awesome.
Oh, shoot.
Bischoff
tweeting them.
Bischoff also began to give away the results of Raw matches on Nitro because
What?
Raw was previously taped.
Oh, no.
Now, this would create one of the biggest gaffes in WCW history.
Oh, no.
Are you familiar with Mick Foley?
Yes.
So in 1999, on the January, I'm trying to do this off the top of my head, 4th, it was the first Raw of the year.
Okay.
Mick Foley, just out of nowhere, basically, probably my favorite Raw to watch. It's got some terrible segments, but God, it's awesome. Mick Foley won the World Championship.
Okay.
He had never won a World Championship before.
Okay.
He was someone who was loved by diehard wrestling fans, but he didn't have the right look, and, you know, because he's like a heavier set guy, and he looks like kind of homely.
Yeah.
He just didn't have, like, the right characteristics to be champion.
Right.
That's what everybody
Quote,
thought.
unquote. Yeah.
Yeah, I was doing air quotes if you're listening to the audio.
Yeah.
So him winning was a huge surprise and like just a beautiful moment for wrestling fans.
Yeah.
He was helped by a returning Stone Cold to come in and stunner The Rock.
What?
Yeah.
Okay, so was The Rock a babyface?
The Rock was a heel at the time.
He was a heel at the
and
time.
he was with the corporation, which was evil Mr. McMahon's, like, stooges, basically.
Okay.
And he was the champion, and they had done dastardly things, and DX were good guys.
DMX, yeah.
Yeah, DMX was a good guy.
Yeah.
So DX were there for Foley. The corporation was there for Vince. And Stone Cold comes out, stunners. Stone Cold coming out, by the way, in this 1999 Raw. The biggest, what we would call a pop, biggest crowd reaction ever.
Really?
It is deafening. Like, the cheers on it.
Was he that huge at that time?
He was, yeah. Was the old Beatles quote, bigger than God, more money than God? That was him.
Yeah.
It was, because he'd been away for a little while, too.
Oh, okay.
It was phenomenal. One of my favorite wrestling, like, gives me chills to watch. It's fantastic. So he comes out and stunners The Rock. Mick Foley wins. Bischoff thinks he's clever. Okay. This is WCW. Bischoff thinks he's clever and is going to say, oh, and by the way, Mick Foley wins the world title tonight on Raw. We thought we'd go ahead and save you that. So people went and watched it.
Well, yeah.
Because it was Mick Foley winning the title.
So they thought they were being clever and spoiling it so more people wouldn't watch it because they were spoiling it, when really what they were doing was encouraging people to watch it.
To see how it happened.
They wanted to see how he won.
Yes.
So it backfired.
Yes. It's one of my favorite wrestling moments.
That's so dumb of them.
Yeah, it was really... They dropped... I can't remember the stat, but I think it was like 3 million viewers when they said that.
Wow.
Like, just instantly turn it over to Raw.
Well, yeah.
Because if you're a wrestling... one of the best parts about the Monday Night Wars is if you were a wrestling fan at the time, you just kind of went where the good product was.
Right.
If Raw was having a bad time, you went to WCW. If Nitro was having a bad time, you went to WWF.
That's
fair. It was just... Yeah. A lot of people were fans of both. Some people were diehard WCW. Some people were diehard WWF.
Yeah.
But at the time, it was really like sort of a buffet of wrestling, if you will. Like, you could just kind of choose.
And all you can eat wherever you chose.
Right. You could just kind of choose whatever you wanted in wrestling.
Yeah.
So that was one of the biggest gaffes in WCW history.
Wow.
Let me find where I was at in my notes here.
I feel like that still would reign supreme today, right? Somebody tells you so-and-so's winning.
And it's something you want to happen, and you're going to go watch it. Yeah. So the whole, like, where the big boys play segment prompted retaliatory tactics by WWF. January 1996, Raw began airing skits before and after commercial breaks entitled Billionaire Ted's Wrasslin' War Room.
Oh, God.
Depicting parodies of Ted Turner, Billionaire Ted, Hulk Hogan, the Huckster, Macho Man Randy Savage, the Nacho Man, and Gene Okerlund, Scheme Gene, instead of Mean Gene. While the material involving Hogan and Savage usually poked fun at their old ages, skits aimed at Turner were decidedly more inflammatory in nature and contained material that could have been considered slanderous. The sketches promptly stopped airing on the USA Network at the request of network president Kay Koplovitz and were ended permanently in a short presented before WrestleMania 12, which killed off all the characters.
What?
Wrestling's weird.
Hold on. Killed off all the characters?
Yeah, so they just had like an explosion or something.
And they all died?
Yeah.
No, hold on. No, what?
Yeah, it was dumb. So, basically what happened, there was a writer by the name of Vince Russo.
Okay.
Vince Russo is the one who gave you Mick Foley winning the championship. Vince Russo was always an advocate for Foley. Vince Russo is the one who basically created, like, the ladder match, which was huge.
Ooh, okay.
Russo was beloved by wrestlers at the time because he would give people individual storylines that could make them huge in an instant.
That's cool.
Like, he just made people. Like, he was an incredible writer.
Yeah.
But Russo also had some ridiculous ideas.
Uh-oh.
And Russo was kept corralled in by, like him or not, Vince McMahon. Vince and Russo had an incredible working relationship and gave you some of the best and worst moments of the Attitude Era in WWF.
Hot take. I don't like Vince McMahon.
You probably shouldn't.
I don't like him.
Vince probably a terrible human.
I feel like he's kind of a jerk.
He absolutely is.
And I don't like him.
The only redeeming quality about Vince McMahon
is his shoulder walk. It's how bad he is at walking.
Is that he has done so much for wrestling, almost in spite of himself. Like, he seems utterly insane, but sometimes it's brilliance. I don't like Vince, but I respect him for just the amount of ridiculousness he's willing to try.
I mean, he's obviously been able to bring in, like, new and old audiences alike.
Yeah, he's going wrestling for 40 years.
Yeah, so he's been able to get new people, old people into wrestling. So kudos to him on that front, I guess. But, like, as a person, he kind of seems like
he seems like a total asshole.
Like a garbage human a little
absolutely.
bit. Like, kind of like a garbage 100% person.
100% agree with you. So, Russo and McMahon were a good working relationship.
Okay.
Russo then goes over to WCW.
Okay.
They offer him a bunch of money. Bischoff has kind of drove the company in the ground. They're like, you gave us some of the best wrestling moments of the 90s. Will you come help our company? And he said in an interview, and he's like, I wanted to see if it was me truly doing it. I wanted to see if I was the one creating all these moments.
Dang.
I wanted to see if I could do it again, basically.
Okay.
And he couldn't. He didn't have Vince McMahon telling him what was good and bad. This is what gave us birth to the moments of the Judy Bagwell, Buff Bagwell's mom, on a pole match.
What?
I won't get into it, but just ridiculous. Like,
you just rolled your eyes so hard.
He was doing ridiculous stipulation matches and convoluted stories, and it was almost like you gave a writer ultimate free reign without ever talking to the wrestlers.
Yeah. Okay.
And so it just became this utter. It was like M. Night Shyamalan was writing a wrestling show. Like, so many double turns and people turning on each other and interferences. I love watching these old bad WCW pay-per-views. I don't know what it is in me, but I love watching them. There was one pay-per-view, WCW, when they were dying, tried to do a thing where they named a pay-per-view after every sin because they thought that'd be cool and edgy.
Oh, God.
So at WCW Greed 2001, it seemed like every match...
The Lust one was just like porn.
They never got the Lust, unfortunately.
You had to pay extra for that one.
Every match had someone run in after the fact and attack somebody, which in wrestling is like a once, if probably less than once a pay-per-view, like once every other pay-per-view maybe, and it was literally every match. He was trying to give every story as much stuff as he could, and it was just bad. Eventually, WCW would bring Bischoff back. It would do a little better, but, and this is where it gets interesting.
Okay.
It's all interesting, but AOL
what?
And Time Warner merged. Time Warner is Ted Turner's company.
Ted Turner, yeah.
AOL said, we don't want this product because it's terrible. And so they basically put a stop to WCW. Or they're like, you're going to comply with this parental board rating thing now. And it got terrible. So, in the final moments of the Monday Night War, WWF bought WCW.
Oh, shoot.
And then the invasion happened.
The invasion?
And we're not going to get in the invasion on this episode because it'll probably warrant an episode all its own.
Is it literally called the invasion?
Yes.
Is it just like they all just clashed and...
We'll get into it another time. It is one of the most interesting and most bungled wrestling moments of all time. Probably the most bungled wrestling moment of all time.
Dang, okay.
It's really fascinating, but that's sort of a brief, again, you can get into so many things about the Monday Night Wars.
Right.
Sort of a brief synopsis of what happened.
That's fair. That's fair.
So there you go. That's
it.
That's what happened to WCW. If you remember WCW, they did die.
They died.
And WWF bought them supposedly for a very cheap price. No one's ever disclosed what it is, but they supposedly got them for
really
pennies to the dollar. Yeah.
Ooh.
And that's what made WWF sort of the big boy for a long, long time.
And thus ended the WCW's reign.
Yep. WCW, not the future of professional wrestling.
Not the future of the wrestling. Not the future wrestle boys that they believed they could be.
I admire Ted Turner, though. He tried.
So, I don't know that I've ever seen Ted Turner.
He's an old white dude.
But I've absolutely seen Vince McMahon.
Yeah.
But I don't know that I've seen Ted Turner.
Old white dude with a white mustache.
I mean, that checks out, right?
Yep. From Atlanta. He had a big draw. Own the Atlanta Braves.
He's got too much money, probably.
He had too much money.
He's got too much money.
I agree with that.
He didn't, in other words, he didn't lose anything by losing the WCW.
No, he was fine.
Like, he was
died
fine.
with millions.
Is he dead?
Yeah.
Rip.
Well.
I mean, was he nice?
I don't know. I didn't know the guy.
Rip if you're nice.
He just gave me that great quote that I use all the time.
Which is?
WCW is the future of professional wrestling.
It wasn't.
Somebody said wrestling.
It wasn't, though.
And that's what's great about it. Some beautiful.
What's great is that it wasn't.
Some beautiful irony in it, yeah. Because he was so adamant about it.
That's fair. All right, that's fair.
Lidi, where can people find you?
Twitch.tv/Team Lidi. Where can I find you?
Twitch.tv/DormStreams.
We also have merch.
Yes.
We're on Twitter. We're on Instagram. We're on Snapchat.
These are all things we do.
Normally, Dorm Streams, Team Lidi.
Yep.
All that good stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Got anything else you'd like to add today?
WCW is not the future. They're
wrestling.
sort of the past of professional wrestling.
They're the past of wrestling now.
The rest.
Wrestling.
The pastland.
Ooh.
Thank
you for teaching me about the past of wrestling.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I think that you if you've listened to this episode, you should probably retweet it and you should hashtag. What was it I said earlier?
Old.
Old. Hashtag old.
Hashtag old.
Hashtag old.
Leave it a mystery for people. Don't explain it.
Yeah, don't explain it. You don't have to explain yourself. Hashtag old.
Hashtag old.
This episode. I think that's totally fair. And until next time.
Yeah. Watch where you click.
Watch where you click.